in a new way. I mean, I think you and I talked about this a couple years ago. The richest 20 at that time, the 20 richest billionaires together had as much wealth as the bottom half of all U.S. households combined. And we used to say that was enough that they could fit on one private luxury jet, you know. Now it's three guys, Warren Buffett, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, you know, if they could all sit in a golf cart, they have as much wealth as the bottom half of the population combined. So we're just seeing that upward pressure and concentration of wealth. And the other part of the story is the number of households that have zero or negative wealth, have nothing to fall back on, is also growing. So it's 19%. One out of five households has zero or negative wealth. So those are the two powerful statistics, I think, of looking at them next to each other.
Yeah, I mean there's a bunch of the statistics that pop up, but one of the things that I talk about all the time is you go back to 1982 when I argue a lot of policy changes around taxation because of the Reagan changes that happened, brought us down from 70% top marginal tax rate all the way down to 28% eventually. And there's just this explosion of those 400 on that list. And, I saw a statistic, from 82 to like 2011, the people on that list saw their incomes grow by some obscene number close to like 650%. And you go, the rest of us saw none of that.
That's right. Yeah. In 1983, the median family wealth was 83,000. And then the recent study is it's now 80,000. So it's actually gone down a little bit. And to join the Forbes 400 list in 1982, 83, you needed 75 million, which was about $200 million in today's dollars. Today, the entrance level is $2 billion. So the top has seen a tenfold increase, and the middle is sort of basically steadily going down. And that's borne out in things like declining home ownership statistics. I mean, this is the United States, and home ownership has been sliding downwards for 10 years. So it really, sometimes people say, well, does it really matter how rich the rich are? But it actually matters a lot in terms of rigging the rules and distorting who benefits.
Oh, certainly. I mean, if you've got all this money, what do you do with it? You start buying politicians, you start spending a lot of money on lobbying and also influencing, public opinion. I talk all the time about, how much like the Koch brothers, for instance, spend on, influencing college students by funding different universities and different places like that to change how we think about economics. It's amazing and it's remarkable what they've been able to accomplish, in my view, in such a very short time.
I just read a Wall Street Journal article today about the influence of billionaires on this tax fight. There's like 4 or 5 billionaires who've put up, somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 million to buy TV advertising just to lobby for this tax cut program. And the people who are lobbying against it, like Americans for Tax Fairness, they were lucky that they were raised close to $1 million to sort of make that counter argument. So this whole tax debate, which will only make, these inequalities worse. I mean, we're talking about compounding them. And yet billionaires are using their wealth and power to rig the rules to get more wealth and power.
Yeah, I think Congressman Chris Collins of New York, he probably, summed it up the best. He probably didn't mean to, but he said, look, if we don't pass this tax plan, my donors are telling me don't ever call me again. The wealthy people, they've invested in politicians to push this through, and they want their return on investment.
Yeah, I remember when elected officials used to say the voters will be upset, but now they just say their donors will be upset. It is a fascinating, admission, really, that who are they accountable to? I mean, what's fascinating after 40 years of trickle-down economics is people aren't falling for it. These tax cuts, like 28% of the electorate thinks they're a good idea. That means that a lot of people are suspicious. They understand the sales pitch around, trickle-down economics, that it's just about, it's just going to reward a bunch of corporations, global corporations that are already kind of badly behaved. They're already offshoring and tax dodging, and it's going to reward the wealthy. And so I'm encouraged. And so the Republicans are in an interesting situation where they're a minority they have a minority. You know, their viewpoint is not popular, but they need to ram this tax program through to satisfy their donor class,
Yeah,
not their voters.
and what I love is the story, the fables and the fairy tales that they keep telling us over and over and over again. And I keep asking when we'll stop buying it. You know, this idea that somehow tax cuts for corporations and for the very well-to-do are going to create all these jobs. You know, I have a friend wealthy, and he said, "Look, you give me a $20,000 tax cut, I'm going to go on vacation. If you business, you want to help investment, give me customers. Put that $20,000 in 20 people's hands and get them walking through my door. Then I'll hire people because I want their business."
Yeah, that common sense economic theory, more and more people understand that. You know, we've given tax cuts to these corporations. We have plenty of evidence, actually. We can look at all these tax, we can look at the corporate tax reductions, corporate tax amnesty. What do the big corporations do? They basically bring their capital back. They buy up their own stock. They give their shareholders a bigger dividend, and they pay their CEOs a little bit more. And then they turn around and lay off more workers.
Yep.
Just for the reason you said, Rick. They what ultimately will expand their businesses is middle class expansion and middle class customers.
What's interesting to me again, and we and I hope we're getting this, and I hope you're right. I hope that growing tax cuts create jobs. We more revenue coming into the government. That was always one of my favorites because, well, people will pay their taxes. Well, how about we just make sure that they pay their taxes when they should? I mean, I pay them.
Yeah, it's absolutely. I mean, this is where I think the Republicans are in trouble because even their own members, they you know, this sort of dynamic scoring, this idea that somehow you're going to cut taxes and it's going to create growth and it's going to expand the tax pool. You know, that's just a kind of a bankrupt theory. Even among some of the Republicans are saying, you know, we've been doing this 1981, 1986, 1990, you know, 80, you know, they just keep going down the years and the same thing keeps happening. The debt keeps growing. So I am encouraged. Polls say 70% of the public don't think they're really going to get much from this tax cut and believe that corporations should pay more, not less, and that the wealthiest 1% should pay more, not less.
Yeah.
I think those are encouraging signs.
No, I'm with you. But here again, I keep coming back to this. You know, if we've got Donald Trump running around saying that, you know, corporations are doing fabulously well, profits are at an all-time high, you know, but they need more money. You know, they're hoarding all of this offshore, but they need more. Look, if they wanted to invest, if they wanted to create more jobs, and, you know, interest rates are at historic lows still. They could easily do it. We don't need to give more. And the other part of it is what's frustrating. While we're creating another $1.5 trillion deficit, we're not investing in roads and bridges and education and health care and all the other things that we need to be doing simultaneously that we're not.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that you know, we know the formula for shared prosperity. It's taxing the wealthy, it's taxing inheritances, and investing in public goods like infrastructure, access to debt-free education, first-time homebuyer programs for people who are excluded. That was the formula, really, from 1945 to the mid-'70s. It led to shared prosperity. It was middle-out economic stimulus. And basically, we have to kind of, you know, return to certain elements of that for sure.
You think it's possible? I mean, look, I mean, right now you listen to the voices, you know, people who are, you know, donors of Representative Collins in New York there. I'm not related to you, right?
Not that I'm aware of.
You know, he's saying, look, my donors, they want their return on investment. Is it possible to pull them back into this conversation? I mean, because look, I mean, we've really just split so far apart.
I don't know about those donors, but I do think that the public, if there were leadership putting forward a program, say a debt-free college education funded by a tax on wealth over, you know, $50 million, you would have a lot of people standing up and supporting that. Expanding debt-free tuition-free education. You have millions of families and students standing up in support of that. First-time homebuyer programs. One of the things about this tax cut proposal is they do have like the reform of the home mortgage interest deduction. Well, actually, I think that's a good idea, except it's just there to pay for a corporate tax cut. If it was there to expand home ownership for people who don't have access to a home, then it would be a whole different kind of story, really. I think you get broader political support.
Yeah, I think a lot of this stuff, especially the things that they keep saying are going to help the working class, just window dressing, like the child tax credit, that, it's just a credit. If you don't have the income, what does it matter? And, there's a bunch of that stuff that, that just jumps right out at us. So last line of questioning I've got for you, in looking at the solutions going forward, are there people in Congress who are pushing this? And are there people we should be supporting saying, hey, we want you to get out there and do more of this. We want you to push a progressive agenda, a progressive tax code. I'm curious if there is anyone.
Well, I think pretty much the Congressional Progressive Caucus. So there's about 80 members in the House and maybe a dozen members in the Senate. That group, and they've put forward an alternative budget that includes, reforming the estate tax. Representative Pramila Jayapal from Seattle, Senator Bernie Sanders, and others. There is a constituency, and actually there's a network. The Patriotic Millionaires and some other groups are putting forward a tax the wealthy alternative plan that's going to have some of the components. So similar to the healthcare issue, while they were trying to repeal healthcare, there was also a progressive push for what should be the alternative. And I think we're going to see that emerge in the next couple of weeks. So I think that's encouraging, and that's the kind of thing that we should be saying. And what we already know is that that program has widespread support, unlike the current tax cut proposal.
Yeah, I mean, as I always say, it's one thing to be against something, but what are you for? And for me, I think, as you pointed out, we need to be talking about how we have a tax code that's fair, but that, has those who have done wildly well in this economy paying a little bit more and helping out where they should. Chuck, I appreciate the time. Always great talking with you.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks for having me on.
All right, Chuck Collins, thanks so much.
Would you give your house key to a complete stranger, letting that person, whose name you don't even know, walk right into your home when you're not there? One stranger who's brazenly asking you and millions of other people to do just that is Jeff Bezos. He's head honcho of Amazon, the e-commerce behemoth whose vast supercomputer network routinely compiles and stores dossiers on every one of his customers. He's obsessed with having the most data on the most people. It's a little creepy. Now, adding to the creep factor, Jeff literally wants Amazon to get inside your home, and ironically, he's using security as his rationale. Rather than simply delivering the products you order from Amazon to your doorstep, the corporation wants a key to unlock your door, allowing its delivery crew on you being robbed, of course, either by rogue Amazon employees or by hackers, who will certainly gain access to the corporation's computerized key codes. Or maybe Crusher, your pit bull, mauls the Amazon intruder and you get sued. Need I mention that Bezos expects you to pay for the privilege of having his employees enter your home? First, his dicey Open Sesame program, which he calls Amazon Key, is available only to customers who shell out $99 a year to be Amazon Prime members. Second, you must buy a special internet unlocking gizmo and a particular camera to join his corporate key club. And guess where you must go to buy this entry technology? Yes, Amazon, where prices for the gizmo and camera setup start at $250. This is Jim Hightower saying, what a deal! For Amazon, that is. Bezos' real goal is not to get inside your home, but inside your wallet.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
TheRickSmithShow.com. You know, you listen to those. I mean, just the numbers. I mean, just the sheer numbers. And the fact that, you know what we absolutely need, honestly and truthfully, is that progressive tax code that Chuck was talking about. The idea that, look, we want to make sure that the wealthy pay their fair share. They get overwhelming benefits. And if you look at their report, and I highly suggest taking a look at it, because, you know, they talk about, look, the wealthy in this country, you know, while we like to put them on a pedestal and say, you know, how wonderful and how smart and all that they are, the reality is they benefit from our legal system. They benefit from our infrastructure, from our education system. So many benefits that, you know, someone's got to pay for it. And what's interesting is they always turn around and say, well, we should have to pay for it because they give us jobs. See how nice they are? Because without them, we'd all be standing around looking at each other, going, what are we going to do? Not true, but, you know, that's the claim. And, you know, to me, the idea that you have this millionaire class, it's not even millionaires. I mean, yeah, in my lifetime, you know, thinking of someone who had $1 million was just, oh my gosh. There are people with tens of billions of dollars. And we're talking about giving them more tax breaks. Let that sink in for a minute. And I've told the story a number of times of, you know, when I first started working. You know, back in the late 80s, I was making $15 an hour to start. $18.80 was the top rate, as I remember. Healthcare, pension, sick days, all that stuff. And that was the norm. Overtime after 8 hours, not after 40, or none of this independent contractor and misclassification nonsense. Today, the exact same job, $14 an hour, top rate of $18, and, you know, at $14, no health care, no pension, none of that. So where did all that wealth that, when I started working, went to the person who worked? Where did that go? Well, it went upward. And all my Tea Party friends say, well, you're talking about redistribution of wealth. And you go, you're damn right I am. I would like it redistributed back to the way it was, where you had a prosperous working class. And guess what? You still had wealthy people. There were still people on the Forbes 400. The difference was it took $75 million to get on the Forbes 400 instead of $2 billion. You want to know where the wealth of the working class is gone? Look at the Forbes 400. And again, I think they're going to have to expand it to the Forbes 600 because we've got that many billionaires. It's just crazy on so many levels. And the fact that those people in Congress are continually saying we need to do more of the same bad idea is just wow. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, you know, I'm a big fan of alternative energy, renewable energies. What this tax scheme does, it's going to kill another one of those opportunities to get us off the dirty stuff and move us down the road. And I guess, you know, that's by plan. We're going to come back right after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1887. That was the day that Louis Ling died in prison while awaiting execution for his alleged role in a bombing at a workers' rally at Haymarket Square in Chicago the year before. Louis was born in Germany. His father worked for a lumber mill. One day, while trying to clear a log jam, his father fell into an icy river. Although Louis's father lived, he could no longer carry the same workload. The company fired him despite his 20 years of service. Louis began to question a labor system that would let this happen. He became a carpenter's apprentice. Louis then traveled to Switzerland, where he became acquainted with anarchist worker groups. Finally, in 1885, Louis made his way to the United States and Chicago. There he joined the Carpenters and Joiners Union. He became an outspoken advocate for the cause of the 8-hour workday. The movement had great success in Chicago, and on May 1st, or May Day, thousands marched in the streets for the 8-hour cause. When a bomb was thrown at a workers' rally 3 days later, the backlash against the labor movement was swift and brutal. 8 men, including Louis Ling, stood trial and were convicted despite a lack of evidence tying them to the bombing. Louis Ling and 4 others were sentenced to death by hanging. But the day before the sentence was to be carried out, Louis lit a cigar in his prison cell. The cigar was packed with explosives. The explosion left Louis in agony for hours before he finally died. Some believe he committed suicide rather than die at the hands of the legal system. Others believe he was murdered. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2. I'm Rick Smith. The Republican plan would kill over half of all new wind farms planned in the U.S. That's why I've asked Peter Kelly to come talk with us. He is the vice president of public affairs at the American Wind Energy Association. Peter, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick. It's nice to be on your show. I used to be a reporter in Pennsylvania at the Harrisburg Patriot.
Oh, good stuff. So let me ask you, how big of a hit are we talking here if the Republican plan goes into place?
Well, the wind energy industry went first on tax reform 2 years ago and agreed to phase out the tax credit for wind. And so a lot of business deals were made on that basis. They financed their projects. They're scaling up the wind turbines. They're hiring people. Every wind turbine you see represents 44 years of full-time employment. And that's 44 job years of construction workers and manufacturing workers, operations and maintenance, transportation. It's the people who put up the towers and go up there every day to make sure they're running right. That's the fastest growing job in America, along with solar installer.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I mean, I saw the statistics that, wind energy has, seen, I think 9 times the job creation rate of the overall economy. Solar saw similar things. But I look at this administration, and these are people who, they don't want to care about wind or solar or geothermal or tidal or anything other than, drill, baby, drill.
Well, we're asking them to care about the jobs and the deals that have already been signed, because if this package went through like the U.S. House of Representatives wants, they would kick the legs out from under our whole industry. Over half of all the wind farms under development right now would be canceled. Over half of the 100,000 jobs we got would be laid off. And we're looking at a loss of another 50,000 jobs we could be growing during this period. Right. So it's a huge hit on the economy. And some of these are factory jobs. Right now, out of our 100,000 jobs, a quarter of those are factory jobs, including 6 factories in the Harrisburg area that are making components as part of the supply chain for these wind turbines. So if you shut down the development of new wind farms, you're also throwing factory workers out of work.
Yeah, and this is an administration that claims to love the factory worker. But here's the thing, and what the argument against you is that, look, you're screwing with the free market. The free market will dictate the invisible hand, all of that stuff. And by giving these subsidies, we're picking winners and losers. Isn't that the argument?
Well, it's not a subsidy to give you lower tax rate for the first 10 years of a wind farm. But I understand that some people are opposed to even that incentive for clean energy. The fact is we're phasing that out. That is going away. In the next 2 years, there will be no more tax credit for wind energy. But the deals signed today, the development, the construction jobs, the manufacturing, the orders at these factories, that all depends on these deals that are underway right now. And unique to all the industries in America, this House tax reform bill would cancel those contracts. It would go back and rewrite the rules from 2 years ago. You'd have to refinance your projects. You'd have to requalify. You'd have to sign new deals for financing and see if you can make your project pencil out. And we calculate over half the wind projects in America would thus be canceled or thrown into complete chaos for the next several years. So it's a bad news bill for business, but it's also bad news for everybody who's working in this industry.
And it's also bad. Look, I'm someone who believes in renewable energy, and I think we should be investing heavily in the energy of the future, especially clean stuff. But, again, that takes vision and foresight and all that stuff. But what do you say to the person? And I get this a lot because, look, I personally am a big supporter of wind and solar and geothermal and tidal, and you go down the list. There are lots of ways to do this. But what do you say to the person, Peter, who goes, you know what? I drive down the turnpike, I see the windmills. They're not turning. If there's no wind, there's no energy. What do you say to them?
Well, occasionally you see a turbine that's not turning because it's being maintained by one of those wind techs that's up in there maintaining it. But by and large, they do turn. They do make energy. 90% of the time, they're making useful amounts of electricity. And almost half the time, they're reaching full capacity on an annual basis. So that's the same as a gas plant. It's the same as a coal plant. They don't run them 24/7 flat out 365 days a year either. So really, the amount of energy you're getting from these turbines is a stable, predictable amount that the grid can plan on. And it's making a lot of cheap electricity across the country. They also need to build power lines to get this cheap electricity to us so we can pay less on electric bills. So those are more jobs, building the power lines and the transmission. We're building out a whole new electric grid in this country to be more reliable and use more clean energy to boot.
Yeah, no, I remember back, I think it was in the early 90s. I think it was 92 when Jerry Brown was running for president, now the governor of California. And what he ran on was exactly that idea. We're going to rewire the entire country, because I don't remember the exact number, but I think he said something like half of all of the electricity that we produce is lost in transmission because our system's antiquated.
Right. And one of the things they're doing is using direct current lines. DC lines lose a lot less electricity, so you can move this cheap, clean energy across state lines and move it halfway across the country if you need to. And then you put it back into AC current at the other end. So that's another source of new business and new investment, new jobs. One thing interesting about the wind energy industry, it's almost all in rural areas. 99% of the turbines are built in the countryside outside of cities. It's in counties that are economically distressed in some cases and looking for business. These counties are losing their young people. They can't afford to pay their teachers in some cases. And if you get a wind farm in that community, all of a sudden you've got new tax base. You can pave the roads, you can pay the ambulance drivers and the teachers, and you can keep investing in your young people. So it's a good news story for rural America that I think is being missed as they see if they can knock the wind industry back several years, really.
Yeah, now you brought up an interesting point about the jobs in rural areas and all this. Now, one of the knocks that I hear, Peter, is that, once you build it, there are no more jobs. I have friends who are big supporters of coal, and they say, look, those coal miners are down in the mines and they're working every day. Once we put up solar panels or once we put up, these wind turbines or we do this other stuff, there are no jobs.
Well, you get 10 or 15 jobs out of a typical wind farm to operate and maintain it. And then you've got the factory jobs that it took to build those wind turbines, and you've got the construction jobs to build the next one. The fact is, we could be making 35% of our electricity with wind across the whole country, which is what Iowa is doing today. Iowa is now up above 35% wind powered. We're only about 6% today.
Right.
So between 6% today and what we could be, there's a lot of jobs in construction, and I think that is good news. It's a whole generation of careers. These are well-paying careers. They've got benefits. They're not going away.
Yeah, it's not stuff. It's not stuff. They're not jobs that are going to end up in China or somewhere else. So but let me ask you this, because again, this comes into this idea of having a national energy strategy. I mean, there are places where where wind farms would be a great idea. I think of the Midwest, where you've got really open fields. It seems smart that we would be wanting to do this. So why do you think, and I guess this is an opinion thought, why is it that there's such pushback?
It's change, and change sometimes results in people wanting to ask a lot of questions, and they should ask questions. When you put up a wind turbine today, it's a large structure on the landscape, and frankly, it is cheap energy because it's made at scale. It's made at utility scale. It's some of the cheapest energy you can possibly have with no fuel, no pollution, no water use. There's a lot to say for it. And people need to get used to it. They need to ask questions of, is this going to be beneficial to my property values. The studies say, yes, it helps your community. And so your property values go up. It's not a concern for property values. Is it going to affect the way I go about my daily life? And, I've been to many wind farms now that I work in the industry. And the first thing people say when they go to a wind farm is, this is quiet. I heard they were making sounds that were bothering people. And they say, this is quiet. And
they kill birds.
Things that people want to know, and we want to reassure them about that.
Right, and you're a bird killer. That's the other one I get.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. So the average wind turbine is struck by a bird about once a month or less. One bird per month might be what would run into a turbine. Now, you've got tall buildings all over the place and water towers, and they're struck by far more birds than that. Cell phone towers.
No, they run into my house more often than that.
Right.
They're always bouncing off windows. So
what we're doing is we're eliminating pollution that is killing the birds.
Well, there is that. So let me ask you a last line of questioning, because, I know we like to think that we're number one around the world. Where do we stand with the rest of the world? I know Germany seems to be so far ahead of us on wind and solar and all that. Where are we in the world?
So the U.S. used to be the biggest producer of wind energy in the world, and China just passed us. China has adopted this technology too, as has Europe and now South America, and it's spreading into Africa. Really, all over the world, they're following our example. But it is an American example. We invented this technology in California and in Vermont and in New Hampshire back in the 30s. And then it came back in the 70s. And then finally, they figured out how to take it to scale now, 30, 40, 50 years since the technology really was developed. These turbines are much more advanced now. And so we're able to ship our technology across the world. We can make all 8,000 parts in a turbine right here in America. And we invented the technology in the first place.
Yeah, good stuff. So we should be contacting our representatives, should be yelling at senators, congressmen, what?
So the good news is Pennsylvania actually has some leadership on this. We appreciate Senator Casey's support. And the rest of the Pennsylvania delegation ought to understand the value of wind energy to the state's economy. 27 factories in Pennsylvania. About 2,000 Pennsylvanians are working directly in wind. And there's $100 million headed for new wind farm investment in rural parts of America. In Pennsylvania. There's $50 billion headed across America that are at risk if they don't fix this bill in the Senate.
Good stuff. Peter, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks so much.
All right.
From Seoul, South Korea, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. From Seoul, South Korea, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. Just hours after wrapping up a largely cordial visit to China on Friday, President Trump used a speech at a regional economic summit in Vietnam to assail Chinese trade practices.
While we lowered market barriers, other countries didn't open their markets to us.
Trump didn't single out China by name, but his words were clearly aimed at Beijing, which continues to maintain steep barriers against inroads by American companies. And Trump didn't stop there.
We will not remain silent as American companies are targeted by state-affiliated actors for economic gain, whether through cyber attacks, corporate espionage, or other anti-competitive practices.
Earlier this year, Trump directed his trade representative to investigate Chinese theft of American intellectual property, while Congress continues to probe Chinese investments in sensitive sectors of the U.S. economy. You'd never guess that by listening to Chinese President Xi Jinping's own remarks at the same summit.
This is a new journey toward greater integration with the world and an open economy of higher standards.
Experts say China's economy isn't as open as Xi suggests, yet compared to Trump's more protectionist trade policy, Xi has a strategic opening. Rolf Langhammer researches global trade at the Kiel Institute for the World Economy.
What President Xi wants to do is, of course, he fills a vacuum which has been opened by President Trump, that he is now the new leader in the world economy.
To his credit, Trump did pledge to overhaul America's overseas investment strategy and to try and counter Chinese investment in infrastructure across the developing world. But Langhammer says Trump is late to the party.
China is far ahead with respect to projects and money in infrastructure planning.
Luke Vargas in Korea. From Seoul, South Korea, this is your...
The wind industry, not surprising. They want to kill solar. They want to kill anything but good old drill, baby, drill. I remember when we put solar panels on our house, and it was back, I think it was 2011 when we had done that. For 1,000 kilowatt hours or one credit, it was like $225 at the time, which meant that the payoff for putting solar panels on your house would have been like 6 years. We create almost half of our electricity through our solar panels. But that's, if you were going to have to solely do it on your electric bill savings, it would take like 20 years. So to entice people to do more solar and to take some of the demand off of the electrical grid, the state at one point had an energy portfolio where, the big energy companies had to get so much from renewables. Solar being one of them. And what they did during the Corbett years is they just didn't update the portfolio. So what ended up happening is the more people like me and other people across the state who put panels on their home, the capacity went through the roof because it was a huge thing. A lot of people did it. The Rendell administration put some money into a sunshine fund to get people going in that direction with the promise that we're going to keep upping the amount of renewable energy the energy providers were supposed to be using, thus keeping somewhat of a stable market. Well, Corbett comes in and guts that. So no more increase in the percentage of renewable energies, but yet the amount of available renewable energy just skyrocketed because we invested as a society, we invested in it. And like I said, when we bought on, the first couple of credits were $225. Right now, here, just a couple of years later, they're $10. And the payoff it really killed the residential solar in this area. I know the company that put our panels up laid off a bunch of people, as did a lot of installers. And again, you hear people talk, well, we care about jobs. Well, you know what? Those were good jobs too. And at the end of it, it comes down to policy and the people that we put into these political positions. So is it surprising to me that Congress is trying to kill wind? No, not at all. That $50 billion that we give that to the oil companies, make them thrilled, make them happy. Angering, frustrating, all of that wrapped up into one big ball of wax. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'd be interested in hear your thoughts. Interesting week, the Roy Moore thing. So much to get to. Can't wait for Monday. Again, if you missed any of the show.com, that's where you go get the podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday.